9:47 in the morning. Richard Blackstone was being escorted off Delta Flight 447 San Francisco, New York, by two security agents, while dozens of passengers recorded with cell phones what would become the most devastating video in American commercial aviation history. "You don't know who you're messing with," screamed Blackstone, his voice echoing through the terminal as he was led away from the aircraft. "I'm going to destroy this company." To understand how 30 seconds of arrogance cost an $8 billion fortune and a reputation built over 3 decades, we need to go back to the flight that would change 2 lives forever, and prove that character is revealed when no one is watching. 2 hours earlier, Richard Blackstone had arrived at San Francisco International Airport in the back seat of his Bentley Mulsanne, talking on the phone about acquiring a renewable energy company that would seal his position as one of America's most powerful men. When 58 years old, Blackstone was CEO of Blackstone Energy, an oil empire he had built brick by brick through a combination of brutal intelligence, unbridled ambition, and an impressive ability to crush anyone who stood in his way. Have you ever met someone who confused financial success with human superiority? Richard Blackstone had spent so much time being flattered and feared that he had completely forgotten that money doesn't buy character, and was about to learn that lesson in the most public and humiliating way possible. Character is revealed when no one is watching, his late wife Margaret used to say, trying to soften the edges of a man who saw the world as an extension of his boardroom. But Margaret had passed away 2 years ago, taking with her the only voice that could still humanize Richard Blackstone. Blackstone boarded the flight with the natural arrogance of someone accustomed to having the world function exactly as he ordered. First class, seat 2A, as always. He didn't even greet Ashley Williams, the flight attendant who received him with a professional smile. To him, employees were useful equipment, not people worthy of recognition. He was reviewing contracts on his iPad when Steph Curry boarded. Curry entered the plane discreetly, wearing simple jeans, a basic Warriors t-shirt, and sneakers that had seen better days. There was no entourage, no fanfare, no obvious signs of celebrity that Blackstone would expect to see. It was just a young, black man, carrying a modest backpack and walking with the natural humility of someone who never forgot his origins. It was impossible not to notice the contrast. On one side, Blackstone in his $5,000 Armani suit, Patek Philippe, watch that cost more than a car, and an aura of authority that filled the space around him. On the other, Curry, dressed like any ordinary person, radiating a serene tranquility that came from within, not from material possessions. Curry checked his boarding pass and headed to seat 2B, exactly next to Blackstone. It was at that moment that Blackstone's prejudice awakened like a sleeping animal that suddenly finds a threat in its territory. "Excuse me," Blackstone said, his voice loaded with the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed instantly. "I think you're in the wrong place." Curry looked at his boarding pass, then at Blackstone, and smiled with the natural patience of someone who had dealt with similar situations more times than he cared to. "Remember." "No, sir. Seat 2B. This is the right place." "Impossible," Blackstone declared, as if his word were physical law. "First class is for, well, for people who can afford it. How is it possible for someone to be simultaneously so intelligent as to build an empire and so stupid as not to recognize prejudice coming from their own mouth?" Blackstone was demonstrating exactly that human contradiction. Curry maintained his composure, carefully placing his backpack in the overhead compartment. "Sir, I paid for my seat, just as you paid for yours." "Paid?" Blackstone laughed disdainfully. "Young man, I don't pay for seats. I buy planes." The conversation was attracting curious glances from other first-class passengers. Christopher Lee, a technology executive seated across the aisle, had discreetly begun recording on his cell phone, instinctively sensing that he was witnessing something that shouldn't remain just in memory. What's most impressive is how certain people manage to turn their own ignorance into a public spectacle. Blackstone was about to offer the entire world a masterclass on how not to behave. "Flight attendant," Blackstone called Ashley Williams with the same authority he summoned subordinates in meetings. "We have a problem here." Ashley approached with the trained professionalism of someone who had dealt with difficult passengers during 15 years of career. "How can I help you, sir?" "This young man is clearly in the wrong place. First class is not a place for people like him." The words came out of Blackstone's mouth with terrible naturalness. People like him. 3 words that would reveal not only his prejudice, but his complete disconnection from the reality of who Steph Curry really was. Ashley checked Curry's boarding pass and confirmed, "Sir, the passenger is in the correct seat. Seat 2B, first class." "This is ridiculous." Blackstone stood up, his imposing height being used as a tool of intimidation. "I've been flying this route for 20 years. I know all the regular first-class passengers. This kid obviously got this seat by mistake or other questionable circumstances." Curry took a deep breath, calling upon all his experience of dealing with tense situations on the courts to remain calm. "Sir, there's no mistake at all. I bought this seat legitimately." "Legitimately?" Blackstone practically spat the word. "With what money? Selling drugs? These people always find a way." Naturally, this brings us to the moment when Richard Blackstone crossed a line from which there would be no return, revealing not only prejudice, but an ignorance so profound that it would shock even the most tolerant observers. The silence that followed Blackstone's words was the kind of silence that precedes earthquakes. Other passengers stopped pretending they weren't paying attention. Ashley Williams was visibly shocked. Christopher Lee increased the recording volume on his cell phone, realizing he was documenting something historic. "Sir," Ashley said, trying to maintain professionalism while processing the magnitude of what she had just heard, "I need to ask that you maintain a respectful tone with all passengers." "Respectful?" Blackstone laughed bitterly. "Young lady, I pay more in taxes in 1 month than you earn in a year. Don't tell me how to behave." Curry finally stood up, not aggressively, but with the natural dignity of someone who knew exactly who he was, regardless of others' recognition. "Sir, I understand you're clearly having a difficult day, but there's no need to take your frustration out on me or the flight attendant." Curry's calm and mature response only infuriated Blackstone even more. How dare someone he considered inferior give him advice about behavior? Frustration? Blackstone was now speaking loud enough for the entire plane to hear. "My frustration is having to share space with people who clearly don't belong here. This is first class, not a city bus." How often do we witness someone digging their own grave with words, apparently unaware of the hole they're creating? Blackstone was offering a perfect demonstration of this phenomenon. Diana Thompson, a Wall Street Journal journalist who was a few rows back, had discreetly approached, pretending to go to the bathroom, but actually mentally documenting every word for the article she knew she would write before the plane landed. "Mr. Blackstone," Ashley said, and for the first time her voice carried a firmness that made Blackstone stop talking. "I need to remind you that all passengers on this flight deserve the same respect, regardless of—" "Do you know who I am?" Blackstone interrupted, his voice now carrying a barely disguised threat. "Richard Blackstone, CEO of Blackstone Energy. I could buy and shut down this airline before lunch." It was possible to see that Blackstone had completely lost control of the situation. The man who commanded boardrooms with billionaires was being challenged by a flight attendant and a young passenger, and his only response was financial intimidation. "And you," he pointed directly at Curry, "who do you think you are to stand there as if you belonged in this place?" Curry smiled, not with sarcasm or anger, but with the serenity of someone who was about to teach a lesson about humility that Blackstone would never forget. "My name is Steph Curry," he said simply, extending his hand in a gesture of courtesy that Blackstone completely ignored. The name echoed through first class like a delayed recognition bomb. Christopher Lee almost dropped his cell phone. Diana Thompson stopped pretending she was going to the bathroom. Ashley Williams smiled involuntarily. But Richard Blackstone, blinded by his own prejudice and arrogance, had no idea who he was publicly humiliating. "Steph Curry?" he laughed disdainfully. "Never heard of him. Must be another one of those rappers or influencers who think easy money makes them important." And it was at that moment that Richard Blackstone sealed his fate, proving that sometimes ignorance is the most expensive form of stupidity. But what happened next would change everything forever. The sound of cell phones being discreetly positioned to record filled the first class of Delta Flight 447. Christopher Lee was no longer the only passenger documenting what was rapidly becoming the most public example of prejudice and ignorance ever captured on a commercial aircraft. "Rapper or influencer?" Diana Thompson whispered to the passenger beside her, incredulous. "He really doesn't know who Steph Curry is?" Richard Blackstone, completely oblivious to the fact that he was publicly humiliating one of the most respected and recognized athletes in the world, continued his tirade with the blind confidence of someone who had never faced real consequences for his behavior. Have you ever seen someone dig their own grave with such determination that it becomes impressive? Blackstone was offering a masterclass in self-destruction, and every word that came out of his mouth only made the hole deeper. "Let me clarify something for you, young man," Blackstone said, approaching Curry with the intimidating posture he used in billion-dollar negotiations. "I don't care if you've sold some songs or have some Instagram followers. First class is for people who built real empires, not for internet celebrities." Steph Curry maintained his composure with an elegance that contrasted brutally with Blackstone's rudeness. "Sir, I understand your confusion, but I assure you I have every right to be here." "Right?" Blackstone laughed with a cruelty that made several passengers shrink in their seats. "The only right you have is to get out of here before I call airport security." It was impossible not to notice how the situation was escalating beyond simple prejudice. Blackstone was demonstrating an arrogance so profound that it bordered on sociopathy, unable to recognize the basic humanity of another person. Ashley Williams, who had witnessed thousands of interactions in first class over 15 years of career, had never seen anything so embarrassing. She knew she needed to intervene more decisively, but she also knew that Blackstone was not a man who would accept challenges to his perceived authority. "Mr. Blackstone," she said, approaching carefully, "I need to ask that you maintain a respectful tone. All passengers paid for their seats and deserve—" "Don't tell me what they deserve!" Blackstone exploded, his voice now loud enough for even executive-class passengers to hear. "You have no idea who I am or the power I have." How is it possible for someone to confuse financial power with moral power to the point of becoming completely blind to their own humanity? Blackstone was demonstrating exactly that moral blindness. Diana Thompson, an experienced journalist with 3 decades covering corporate scandals, had seen many powerful executives make public mistakes. But she had never witnessed such complete and real-time documented self-immolation. "Character is revealed when no one is watching," she murmured, remembering the phrase she would use as the title of her article. But in Blackstone's case, character was being revealed when everyone was watching and recording. Curry, demonstrating patience that bordered on the supernatural, tried once more to defuse the situation. "Mr. Blackstone, there's clearly a misunderstanding here. How about we sit down and—" "Misunderstanding?" Blackstone interrupted, his face turning red with indignation. "The only misunderstanding is you thinking you belong at this social level." Naturally, this brings us to the moment when other first-class passengers began to recognize Steph Curry and were shocked not only by Blackstone's prejudice, but by his monumental ignorance. "My God," whispered a woman in row 3. "That's really Steph Curry being humiliated by that idiot?" "He has no idea," her husband replied, also discreetly recording. "He's humiliating one of the world's greatest athletes." Marcus Williams, an entertainment lawyer who represented several celebrities, was seated in row 4 and watched with growing horror. He knew he was witnessing not only prejudice, but a reputational suicide in slow motion. "Steph Curry," he stood up and addressed the confusion. "It's a pleasure to meet you. I'm a big fan." Blackstone turned furiously to Marcus. "Are you also part of this farce? Do you think you can intimidate me by pretending this kid is someone important?" Marcus looked at Blackstone with the same expression he would reserve for someone who had just claimed the earth is flat. "Sir, Steph Curry is one of the most recognized athletes in the world. 3-time NBA champion, 2-time MVP. NBA? Blackstone laughed contemptuously. "I don't waste time with sports. I have real business to take care of." What's most impressive is how ignorance can be simultaneously comic and tragic. Blackstone was literally proud of not knowing who one of America's most famous people was. Curry finally addressed Blackstone directly, his voice maintaining calm but gaining a firmness that everyone on the plane could feel. "Mr. Blackstone, I understand you may be having a difficult day, but that doesn't justify treating any person, famous or not, with disrespect." "Difficult day?" Blackstone exploded again. "I just lost a $2 billion contract because of idiotic environmental regulations, and now I have to put up with people who shouldn't even be on this plane." The unconscious confession revealed the true source of Blackstone's anger. He wasn't just being prejudiced, he was taking out professional frustrations on someone he considered a safe target. Ashley Williams made a decision that would change her own career. 15 years of experience had taught her that some situations require courage, not just professionalism. "Mr. Blackstone," she said, with a firmness that surprised even herself, "I need to inform you that your behavior is violating Delta Airlines' passenger conduct policies. If you continue, I'll have to request security intervention." "Are you threatening me?" Blackstone laughed incredulously. "Young lady, I can buy this airline and fire you before dinner." "Maybe you can," Ashley replied, "but at this moment, on this plane, I represent authority, and all passengers, including Steph Curry, have the right to travel without harassment." How often do we witness someone find courage they didn't even know they possessed? Ashley was having exactly that moment, transforming from submissive employee to defender of justice. Christopher Lee, still recording everything, whispered to his wife, "This video is going to break the internet. Blackstone has no idea what he just did." "Who is Steph Curry, anyway?" she whispered back. "Only one of the world's biggest basketball stars, with tens of millions of fans and endorsement contracts worth more than that idiot's company." The irony of the situation was becoming Shakespearean, one of America's most famous men being humiliated by someone who took pride in his own cultural ignorance. Diana Thompson was mentally writing her article, "How a Billionaire Destroyed His Reputation at 30,000 Feet Altitude." Blackstone, sensing he was losing control of the narrative, decided to escalate even further. "Call security, then. Let's see if they believe this farce that this kid is someone important." "Mr. Blackstone," Curry said, his voice now carrying a quiet authority that made the entire plane fall silent. "You're right about one thing. Character is revealed when no one is watching. But sometimes, when everyone is watching, we reveal who we really are to the entire world." Curry's words echoed through first class like a prophecy. Blackstone was about to discover that some character revelations have consequences that echo far beyond an airplane. "Cheap philosophy," Blackstone disdained. "I'll show you who really runs things here." He pulled out his phone and dialed a number. "Hello? This is the president of Delta, Richard Blackstone. I need you to remove a passenger from my flight immediately." It was possible to feel the tension growing like an electrical storm. Blackstone was about to use all his financial power to crush someone he considered insignificant. But he didn't know he was recording his own sentence of social, financial, and moral death. No one could imagine that moment would be the turning point. Richard Blackstone's call to the president of Delta Airlines lasted exactly 47 seconds. 47 seconds that sealed not only his fate, but became the most shared recording in commercial aviation history, because Christopher Lee had had the brilliant idea of positioning his cell phone to capture both the audio and the reactions of other passengers. "Yes, Bill, it's Richard Blackstone. Listen, carefully. I'm on flight 447, and you've put someone inappropriate in first class. I want you to remove this imposter before takeoff, or you lose all Blackstone Energy contracts with Delta. We're talking about $50 million annually. Have you ever witnessed the exact moment when someone uses all their power for something terribly wrong?" Blackstone was turning his financial influence into a weapon of public humiliation, without imagining that every word was being recorded for posterity. Steph Curry remained seated throughout the entire call, a serene expression on his face that demonstrated emotional maturity that contrasted brutally with the corporate tantrum he was witnessing. He had faced pressure in NBA Finals, but never anything so personally degrading. "No, Bill, I don't care what the protocol is," Blackstone continued, his voice now loud enough for economy-class passengers to hear. "This kid is clearly out of place. He probably got the seat through some fraudulent scheme." Ashley Williams was on the phone with traffic control, reporting a disorderly passenger situation that could delay takeoff. 15 years of experience had taught her to document everything meticulously, especially when it involved threats and discriminatory behavior. It was impossible not to feel the energy on the plane changing dramatically. What had begun as embarrassment was transforming into collective indignation. Passengers who initially were just curious were now actively outraged by Blackstone's behavior. Diana Thompson, veteran journalist, was transcribing everything in real time on her iPhone. She knew she was witnessing the kind of story that defines careers, not just hers, but the end of Blackstone's career. "Bill, Did you hear me? 50 million per year! Blackstone shouted into the phone, clearly frustrated at not receiving the submissive response he expected. Either you remove this problem, or I guarantee Delta will regret it. Forever. How is it possible for someone to be so blinded by their own power that they don't realize they're behaving like a second-rate tyrant? Blackstone was offering a perfect demonstration of how privilege without character transforms into moral monstrosity. Curry finally stood up, not aggressively, but with the natural dignity of someone who had decided it was time to defend himself. Mr. Blackstone, may I suggest you end that call before you say something you'll regret even more? Regret? Blackstone hung up the phone and turned to Curry with a fury that made several passengers instinctively recoil. Kid, you clearly don't understand who you're messing with. Actually, Curry said, with a calm that was more intimidating than any scream, I think I'm the one not being understood here. Naturally, this brings us to the most devastating moment of the confrontation, when Steph Curry decided it was time to educate Richard Blackstone about exactly who he had chosen to publicly humiliate. Marcus Williams, the entertainment lawyer who had observed the entire situation with growing horror, stood up and walked to Blackstone. Sir, I need to inform you that you're making a monumental mistake. Another accomplice to this farce? Blackstone laughed disdainfully. How many of you are involved in this scheme? It's no scheme at all, Marcus said, pulling out his phone and showing Blackstone a photo of Steph Curry on the cover of Sports Illustrated. This is Steph Curry, three-time NBA champion, two-time MVP, one of the most recognized and respected athletes in the world. Blackstone looked at the phone screen, then at Curry, then again at the screen. For a moment, just a moment, his expression showed a shadow of recognition and horror. But pride is a powerful drug, and Blackstone had been addicted for decades. Sports Illustrated? He laughed forcedly. Anyone can be on the cover of a sports magazine. That doesn't mean anything in the real world of business. What's most impressive is how some people prefer to double down on ignorance rather than admit they made a mistake. Blackstone was about to transform a terrible mistake into an epic disaster. Christopher Lee, still recording everything, whispered to his wife, "Is he really going to continue even knowing who Curry is?" "Apparently, yes," she replied, incredulous. "This man is going to destroy himself live." Diana Thompson was mentally rewriting her article. It wouldn't just be about prejudice or arrogance, it would be about the psychology of denial in real time. Curry sighed deeply, as if making a difficult decision. "Mr. Blackstone, I'm going to make one last attempt to resolve this peacefully. My name is Steph Curry. I play for the Golden State Warriors. I have endorsement contracts with Under Armour, Nissan, and other companies that, together, are worth more than $200 million. My foundation has already donated tens of millions to education and charity." He paused, letting the information sink in. "But more important than all of that, I'm a human being who deserves the same basic respect as anyone on this plane. And you, regardless of your wealth, have no right to treat me as if I were less than that." How often do we witness someone maintain absolute dignity while being attacked unjustly? Curry was offering a masterclass in how to respond to cruelty with class. The silence that followed was deafening. Even Blackstone seemed to be processing the magnitude of what he had just heard. But when he finally responded, his response shocked even the most pessimistic observers. 200 million? He laughed, with a cruelty that made everyone present's blood freeze. "Kid, I make that in 3 months. You're still too small to play at my level." It was possible to see that Blackstone had crossed a line from which there would be no return. He was no longer just being prejudiced or ignorant. He was being deliberately cruel. Ashley Williams made a decision that would change her own life. She activated the plane's intercom system and made an announcement that would be heard by all 180 passengers. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the situation in first class. We are dealing with a passenger who is violating our conduct policies. Airport security is on the way. The announcement was like throwing gasoline on the fire. Blackstone exploded in a fury that surprised even those who had already witnessed his aggressiveness. "You can't do this to me!" he screamed, his face turning red with indignation. "I am Richard Blackstone. I can destroy your lives." "Character is revealed when no one is watching," Curry said softly. "But sometimes, when everyone is watching, we reveal exactly who we are to the entire world." Curry's words echoed through the plane like a moral sentence. Blackstone had spent an hour revealing his character to dozens of cell phone cameras, and the verdict couldn't be more devastating. 2 airport security agents boarded the plane at that exact moment. They had been briefed about the situation. Disorderly passenger in first class, discriminatory behavior, threats to employees and other passengers. "Mr. Blackstone," asked the senior agent, "you need to come with us." "This is ridiculous," Blackstone protested, but for the first time his voice carried a note of panic. "You don't know who you're dealing with." "We know exactly who we're dealing with," replied the agent, who had recognized Steph Curry immediately and was shocked by what he witnessed. "And we know you're being removed from this flight for inappropriate behavior." As Blackstone was escorted off the plane, screaming threats and protests, Steph Curry remained seated, watching with an expression that mixed sadness at the human degradation he had witnessed and relief that it had finally ended. Christopher Lee stopped recording and looked at the video file. 2 hours and 17 minutes of a billionaire spectacularly self-destructing while humiliating one of America's most respected men. "This video is going to change everything," he whispered to his wife. He had no idea how prophetic he was being, and it was then that the truth finally came to light. 6 hours and 42 minutes. That was exactly how long it took for Christopher Lee's video to transform into the most viral content in American social media history. When Delta Flight 447 landed in New York, Richard Blackstone had already lost $2 billion in market value, 3 major corporate contracts, and the presidency of the company he had built for 30 years. Breaking: Oil billionaire humiliates Steph Curry on flight. Complete video shocks the world, was the headline on every news website on the planet. To understand how a man went from respected magnate to social pariah in less than 8 hours, we need to follow the tsunami of consequences that swept through Richard Blackstone's life, while he was still being interrogated by San Francisco airport security. Have you ever seen how modern technology can transform a bad decision into instant public judgment? Blackstone was about to discover that in the digital age, character really is revealed when everyone is watching. And recording. The law firm Klein & Associates, which had represented Blackstone for 15 years, was the first to abandon him. The call came while he was still in the airport security room. "Richard," said Jonathan Klein, senior partner, "we can no longer represent you. The video is indescribable. You publicly humiliated one of America's most respected athletes. Our firm has a reputation to protect." "Jonathan, you're exaggerating," Blackstone tried to minimize, still not fully comprehending the magnitude of what he had done. It was just a misunderstanding on a plane. "Richard, There are 17 different videos of the same situation circulating on social media, each one worse than the last. In 6 hours, you've become America's most hated man. It was impossible not to notice that Blackstone still hadn't fully processed what it means to go viral negatively in the social media age. He was about to receive an accelerated education about the power of digital public opinion. Diana Thompson, who had documented everything from the first moment, published her article in the Wall Street Journal exactly 4 hours after landing. Icarus Falls at 30,000 feet. How Richard Blackstone Destroyed an Haute Empire with 47 Seconds of Prejudice. The article not only reported the events, but contextualized Blackstone's behavior within a historical pattern of corporate arrogance that had finally found its consequences in the era of digital transparency. How is it possible for someone to build a 3-decade empire and destroy it in less than a day? Blackstone was discovering that reputation takes generations to build, but can be devastated in a single viral moment. Marcus Williams, the lawyer, who had defended Curry on the plane, was now being bombarded with calls from journalists wanting his perspective as an eyewitness. His description became one of the week's most reproduced quotes. "I witnessed something I never thought possible. A billionaire self-destructing live while trying to humiliate a man who demonstrated more class, dignity, and moral worth than any amount of money could buy." Naturally, this brings us to the moment when Steph Curry decided to use the situation not for personal revenge, but to teach a lesson about humanity that would echo far beyond the world of sports. Curry was at his hotel in New York when his agent called, almost breathless. "Steph, have you seen the numbers? The video already has 50 million views. Everyone is on your side. You can sue Blackstone for billions." "I'm not going to sue anyone," Curry replied calmly. "The man is already paying the price for his own actions." "But Steph, he tried to publicly humiliate you. He deserves the opportunity to learn and grow," Curry interrupted. "Character is revealed when no one is watching, but it also develops when we decide to respond to hatred with something better." 2 hours later, Curry did something that surprised the entire world. He posted a video on his social media, not attacking Blackstone, but using the experience as a teaching opportunity. "Folks, many of you saw what happened on the flight today. I want you to know that I hold no grudge against Mr. Blackstone. We all have moments when we're not our best version. What matters is how we choose to grow from those moments. What's most impressive is how true greatness manifests not in revenge, but in the ability to transform personal pain into universal lesson." Curry was demonstrating a moral class that contrasted brutally with the behavior he had suffered. Curry's response video had 70 million views in 12 hours, but more importantly, it completely changed the national narrative. Instead of becoming a story about cancellation and destruction, it became a story about how to respond to cruelty with dignity. Meanwhile, Richard Blackstone was discovering the true cost of his 47 seconds of arrogance. Blackstone Energy lost 60% of its market value on the first day. The board of directors met in emergency session and, by unanimous vote, removed Blackstone from the presidency. "Richard," said Thomas Crawford, board chairman, "you've become a liability the company can no longer sustain. Your departure is effective immediately." 3 major banks canceled credit lines. 2 insurance companies rescinded corporate policies. The public relations company that had represented him for 20 years sent a termination letter by email. How often do we witness someone discover that power without character is just a temporary illusion? Blackstone was learning this lesson in the most public and painful way possible, but the most profound transformation was yet to come. 6 months after the Flight 447 incident, as it became known, Richard Blackstone was working as a volunteer in the Curry Family Foundation community program in Oakland. Not as a public relations stunt, but as a genuine part of a personal rebuilding process. "Mr. Blackstone," said Maria Santos, program director, "are you sure you want to continue with the park cleanup work? I can find something more suitable to your background." "Maria," Blackstone replied, sweat dripping down his face after 3 hours removing graffiti. "For 30 years I thought I knew what suitable work was. I'm learning that suitable work is that which helps other people, not just myself." It was possible to see that public humiliation had broken something fundamental in Blackstone. Not his spirit, but his arrogance. For the first time in decades, he was learning humility through genuine service. Steph Curry appeared at the community program on an ordinary Tuesday, without prior notice, without cameras, without fanfare. He found Blackstone teaching basic math to children from low-income families. "Mr. Curry," Blackstone stood up immediately, clearly nervous. I didn't know you would be here." "I came to check how the program is working," Curry smiled genuinely. "I heard you've been one of our best volunteers." "I'm trying to make amends," Blackstone said, struggling to find words. "I know nothing can undo what I did, but I hope I can—" "Mr. Blackstone." Curry interrupted him gently. "Character is revealed when no one is watching. And from what I see here, your character is being revealed in a very different way." The two men looked at each other for a moment, the athlete who had responded to cruelty with class, and the businessman who had learned humility through his fall. "Thank you for giving me a second chance," Blackstone said, his voice choked. "Everyone deserves a second chance," Curry replied. "The question is what we do with it." 1 year after the incident, Diana Thompson wrote a follow-up article. Richard Blackstone. From Arrogant Billionaire to Humble Volunteer. An American Redemption Story. The article documented how Blackstone had lost his fortune, but found something more valuable. Genuine purpose in helping others, especially disadvantaged children in Oakland. "I lost billions of dollars," Blackstone was quoted in the article, "but I gained something money never gave me: the satisfaction of making a real difference in other people's lives." Curry, interviewed for the same article, offered his perspective. Mr. Blackstone proved something important: that real change is possible when someone has the courage to confront their own flaws and work to be better. 2 years after going viral for humiliating Steph Curry, Richard Blackstone was being honored by the city of Oakland for his volunteer work. At the ceremony, he gave a speech that perfectly summarized his transformation journey. "Character is revealed when no one is watching," he said to an audience of 300 people. "But sometimes, when everyone is watching, we discover that our character needs to be completely rebuilt. Steph Curry taught me that true wealth is not in what you have, but in what you give. And that dignity doesn't come from power over others, but from service to others." Richard Blackstone had humiliated Steph Curry in first class and regretted it forever. But his regret transformed into redemption, proving that even the greatest mistakes can become the greatest teachings. And perhaps, just perhaps, that's the true definition of a second chance. Not just being forgiven for one's own mistakes, but using those mistakes as a foundation to build something better.